He tried to sabotage his own unit to get transferred to a softer post, but one rookie sniffed him out, turned the whole squad against him, and made sure. His next assignment was the harshest, coldest, most miserable corner of the military. Poetic justice at its finest. Staff Sergeant Marcus Winters had perfected the art of military mediocrity over his 12-year career. Not bad enough to get court-martialed, not good enough to attract unwanted attention. He'd mastered the delicate balance of appearing competent while ensuring he never got assigned to anything truly demanding. That strategy had served him well through multiple deployments to relatively safe bases in Germany, South Korea, and most recently, a cushy logistics position at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. But now, with talk of his unit being deployed to one of the forward operating bases in Afghanistan, Marcus knew he needed an exit strategy. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: sabotage his own unit's performance just enough to get himself transferred to a desk job somewhere safe. Maybe the Pentagon, or better yet, a recruiting station in suburban Ohio, where the biggest danger would be paperwork cuts. Marcus had done his research. If a unit failed multiple readiness assessments, command would shake up the leadership structure. As the senior NCO, he'd be the logical scapegoat, but instead of punishment, he'd be quietly transferred to minimize embarrassment to the chain of command. It was a calculated risk, but Marcus had seen it work before. His plan began during their first field exercise of the new training cycle. As squad leader, Marcus was responsible for coordinating communications between his team and headquarters. It would be simple enough to accidentally use the wrong radio frequencies, causing coordination failures that would cascade through the entire operation. "Bravo team, this is Bravo leader," Marcus spoke into his radio during what should have been a routine patrol exercise. "We're in position at grid reference 1123456. He gave coordinates that were off by 2 kilometers, ensuring that when headquarters tried to send support, they'd be looking in the wrong place entirely. The exercise devolved into chaos as different units failed to link up. Supply drops went to empty fields, and the mock enemy force, played by another unit, ran circles around Marcus's confused and scattered team. What Marcus didn't account for was Private First Class Elena Rodriguez. Rodriguez was fresh out of advanced individual training, barely 20 years old, with the kind of sharp eyes and quick mind that most drill sergeants only dreamed about in their recruits. She'd grown up in East LA, where survival often depended on reading people's intentions before they acted on them. The military was supposed to be her way out, her chance at a college education, and a career that didn't involve watching her back on every street corner. But some habits die hard, and Rodriguez had never stopped watching people carefully. During that first disastrous field exercise, while everyone else was focused on the confusion and trying to figure out what had gone wrong, Rodriguez was watching Marcus. She noticed how he seemed remarkably calm for someone whose unit was falling apart around him. She noticed how he kept checking his watch, like he was waiting for something specific to happen. Most tellingly, she noticed how he positioned himself where he could observe the radio operator's frustration without offering to help fix the communication problems. After the exercise, while the rest of the unit was getting chewed out by their commanding officer, Rodriguez found herself thinking about Marcus's behavior. Something didn't sit right. The second incident came 2 weeks later during a weapons maintenance inspection. Every soldier in the unit was responsible for ensuring their equipment was clean, functional, and ready for deployment. It was routine work, the kind of thing that should have been second nature to experienced soldiers. Marcus made sure it wasn't. As the senior NCO, he was responsible for spot-checking his soldiers' work and signing off on their equipment status. It would be easy enough to overlook a few minor issues that would come to light during the formal inspection. A loose scope here, improper cleaning there, maybe a few soldiers who somehow missed critical maintenance steps despite their training. "Rodriguez," Marcus called out during the prep period, "let me check your rifle." Rodriguez handed over her M4, which she'd spent 2 hours meticulously cleaning and inspecting. Marcus made a show of examining it carefully, then frowned. "Your bolt carrier group isn't seated properly," he announced. "You're going to need to field strip it again and reassemble." Rodriguez was confused. She'd double-checked the assembly herself and everything had been perfect. But she was a PFC and Marcus was a staff sergeant. She didn't argue. What she did do was pay attention. As she disassembled and reassembled her weapon, correctly for the second time, she watched Marcus conduct similar inspections of other soldiers' equipment. Each time, he found problems that required the soldiers to redo work they'd already completed properly. Each time, the soldier looked confused but complied without argument. And each time, Marcus made sure his corrections introduced actual problems that hadn't existed before. Rodriguez realized what was happening when she saw Marcus deliberately loosen the barrel nut on Private Johnson's rifle while pretending to inspect it. Johnson was a solid soldier, methodical and careful. There was no way he'd have made such a basic error. The formal inspection was a disaster. Half the unit failed equipment checks for problems that ranged from suspicious to impossible. Captain Morrison, their commanding officer, was furious. The failure rate suggested either incompetent soldiers or incompetent leadership, and since most of these soldiers had passed similar inspections at their previous units, the blame fell squarely on the leadership structure. "This is unacceptable," Captain Morrison announced to the assembled unit. "We're supposed to deploy in 6 months, and half of you can't even maintain your basic equipment. There are going to be some serious changes around here." Marcus tried to look appropriately disappointed while internally celebrating. 2 major failures in 2 weeks would definitely get someone's attention. A few more incidents like this, and he'd be on his way to a comfortable rear echelon position. But Rodriguez was also paying attention to Captain Morrison's words, and she was starting to see the bigger picture. If their unit was deemed unfit for deployment, it wouldn't just affect Marcus. It would affect all of them. Some soldiers would be transferred to other units and separated from friends they'd trained with for months. Others might see their deployments delayed, which could affect their career progression and educational benefits. More importantly, if their unit was eventually deployed with this kind of performance record, soldiers could die because of inadequate training and preparation. That night, Rodriguez lay in her bunk thinking about what she'd observed. She had no concrete proof that Marcus was sabotaging the unit, just a growing collection of suspicious observations. But her instincts, the same ones that had kept her safe growing up in a neighborhood where trusting the wrong person could get you killed, were screaming that something was very wrong. The third incident convinced her. It happened during a night navigation exercise. Each soldier was given a map, a compass, and a series of waypoints to find in the dark. It was individual work, designed to test each soldier's ability to move through unfamiliar terrain without getting lost or separated from their unit. Marcus volunteered to set up the course, which meant he was responsible for placing the reflective markers that served as waypoints and ensuring they matched the coordinates on the soldiers' maps. Rodriguez was the first to realize something was wrong when she reached what should have been Waypoint Charlie and found nothing but empty forest. She double-checked her navigation, confirmed her position with her compass, and was certain she was in the right place. But there was no marker. Rather than report the problem immediately, which would have been the normal procedure, Rodriguez decided to trust her instincts. She used her night vision goggles to conduct a wider search of the area and found the waypoint marker about 200 meters south of where it should have been, hidden behind a fallen tree where it would be nearly impossible to spot even in daylight. Someone had deliberately moved it. Rodriguez relocated the marker to its correct position and continued the exercise, but she was now actively looking for problems. She found them at Waypoint Delta, where the marker had been placed on the wrong side of a steep ravine, forcing soldiers to attempt a dangerous crossing in the dark, and at Waypoint Echo, where the marker had been camouflaged so thoroughly that it was essentially invisible. By the time she finished the course, Rodriguez had quietly corrected 4 deliberately sabotaged waypoints. She was also certain that she knew who was responsible. The next morning, most of the unit reported navigation failures. Soldiers who were competent with map and compass had somehow gotten lost, spent hours wandering in circles, or failed to find waypoints that should have been clearly marked. Captain Morrison was once again furious, and once again the blame fell on inadequate training and preparation. But this time, Rodriguez was ready. She approached Specialist Jake Davidson, a soldier she'd gotten to know during their advanced individual training. Davidson was smart, observant, and had the kind of technical background that made him good at thinking through complex problems. More importantly, he was someone she trusted. "I need to show you something," she told Davidson during their lunch break, "but you have to promise to hear me out before you say anything." Davidson agreed, and Rodriguez laid out her observations: the suspicious timing of Marcus's radio errors, the equipment problems that somehow got worse after Marcus's inspections, the navigation markers that had been deliberately moved or hidden. "You're talking about accusing a staff sergeant of sabotage," Davidson said when she finished. "That's not something you do lightly." "I know," Rodriguez replied. "But think about it. We're supposed to deploy in 6 months. If our unit keeps failing like this, what happens to us? What happens to the soldiers who get transferred to other units at the last minute? What happens to the ones who stay and deploy with inadequate training?" Davidson was quiet for a long time, processing what she'd told him. Finally, he nodded. "What do you want to do about it?" Rodriguez had been thinking about that question for days. We need proof, real proof, not just suspicious observations. And we need to be smart about how we get it. Their opportunity came during the next field exercise, a complex multi-day operation that would test everything from individual soldier skills to unit-level coordination. Marcus would have multiple opportunities to introduce problems, and Rodriguez was determined to catch him in the act. She and Davidson developed a simple but effective plan. They would work in shifts to maintain covert observation of Marcus throughout the exercise, documenting everything he did with timestamps and detailed notes. More importantly, they would record his actions with Davidson's smartphone, which had a camera function that worked reasonably well in low-light conditions. The first day of the exercise proceeded normally, with Marcus appearing to perform his duties competently. But on the second day, during a communication drill that was critical to the exercise's success, Rodriguez watched through binoculars as Marcus deliberately switched 2 radio frequencies on his communication card before handing it to the radio operator. Davidson captured the entire sequence on video. The resulting communication failure led to a cascade of problems that effectively ended the exercise early. But this time, Rodriguez and Davidson had documented proof of what had caused the failure. The challenge now was figuring out what to do with that proof. Going directly to Captain Morrison was risky. If they were wrong, or if their evidence wasn't convincing enough, they could face charges for making false accusations against a senior NCO. But if they were right, and they did nothing, Marcus would continue sabotaging the unit's readiness. Rodriguez made the decision to approach their platoon sergeant, Sergeant First Class Williams. Williams was a 20-year veteran with a reputation for fairness and integrity. More importantly, he was senior enough to take action, but not so high in the chain of command that approaching him would seem like going over everyone's heads. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you about a serious matter," Rodriguez told Williams during a private moment. "It's about our recent training failures." Williams listened carefully as Rodriguez laid out her observations and evidence. She showed him the video of Marcus switching the radio frequencies, explained the pattern of equipment failures that got worse after Marcus's inspections, and described the navigation waypoints that had been deliberately moved. When she finished, Williams was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the evidence on Davidson's phone. "This is a serious accusation, Rodriguez," Williams finally said. "If you're right, we're talking about deliberate sabotage. If you're wrong, you could be ruining the career of a 12-year veteran." "I understand that, Sergeant," Rodriguez replied, "but I'd rather risk being wrong than risk having soldiers get hurt because our unit wasn't properly trained." Williams nodded slowly. "Give me the phone. I need to review this evidence more thoroughly and figure out how to handle it." Over the next week, Williams conducted his own investigation. He reviewed training records, interviewed other soldiers about their experiences, and most importantly, he set up his own covert observation of Marcus during training activities. What he found confirmed Rodriguez's suspicions. During a live fire exercise, Williams watched Marcus provide incorrect range cards to soldiers at the shooting range, causing their targets to be set up at the wrong distances. During a medical training scenario, Marcus deliberately provided expired supplies that would have failed in a real emergency. And during a vehicle maintenance inspection, Marcus loosened critical bolts on a Humvee that would later be used for convoy training. Williams had seen enough. But rather than immediately confronting Marcus or taking the evidence to Captain Morrison, Williams made a different choice. He decided to involve the entire unit in exposing Marcus's sabotage. The plan was elegant and devastating. Williams approached 6 of the unit's most experienced soldiers, people who had worked with Marcus for months and had started to notice the pattern of problems themselves. He showed them the evidence Rodriguez had gathered and the additional proof he'd collected during his own investigation. The reaction was immediate and intense. These soldiers had trusted Marcus as their senior NCO, had looked to him for leadership and guidance. Learning that he'd been deliberately undermining their training and putting their lives at risk was a betrayal that went to the core of military values. But Williams wasn't done. He asked each of these soldiers to approach others in the unit, people they trusted, and share what they'd learned. Not as gossip or rumor, but as a serious discussion about leadership, trust, and responsibility. Within 3 days, every soldier in the unit knew what Marcus had been doing. The confrontation came during a unit formation on a cold Thursday morning. Captain Morrison was conducting routine announcements when Sergeant First Class Williams requested permission to address the unit. "Sir, the soldiers of this unit have something they need to say about our recent training failures," Williams announced. One by one, soldiers stepped forward to describe what they'd observed. Rodriguez presented her evidence about the navigation waypoints and radio frequencies. Davidson showed the video of Marcus switching the communication cards. Other soldiers described equipment that had been sabotaged and training scenarios that had been deliberately compromised. Marcus tried to defend himself, claiming the soldiers were conspiring against him, but the evidence was overwhelming. More damaging than the proof of sabotage was the complete loss of trust from every soldier in the unit. In the military, where lives depend on teamwork and leadership, losing the confidence of your subordinates is the ultimate failure. Captain Morrison was stunned by the scope and deliberate nature of Marcus's actions, but he was also impressed by the professionalism and initiative Rodriguez had shown in uncovering the sabotage, and by Williams's careful investigation and handling of the situation. Marcus was immediately relieved of his duties and confined to quarters pending a formal investigation. The investigation confirmed everything the soldiers had reported, and more. Military investigators discovered that Marcus had been planning the sabotage for months, researching transfer policies and calculating exactly how many failures he would need to engineer to trigger a leadership reorganization. But Marcus had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed that his sabotage would reflect poorly on Captain Morrison and result in a quiet transfer to save face for the command structure. Instead, the deliberate and systematic nature of his actions was so egregious that it became a criminal matter. Marcus was court-martialed on charges of sabotage, dereliction of duty, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. The evidence was so compelling that his military defense attorney advised him to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. But Rodriguez wasn't finished with Marcus Winters. During the court-martial proceedings, Rodriguez had learned something interesting about military justice and personnel assignments. Soldiers convicted of serious offenses don't just get kicked out of the military. They can be sentenced to serve out their remaining enlistment time in whatever assignment the military chooses. And Rodriguez had a suggestion. She had spent hours researching remote military installations, looking for the most isolated, uncomfortable, and demanding assignments the Army had to offer. She found what she was looking for in Alaska, a remote radar station above the Arctic Circle, where temperatures regularly dropped to 40 below zero, where the sun didn't rise for months during winter, and where the nearest town was a 3-hour helicopter flight away. The station was manned by volunteers who received extra pay and shortened tours of duty because of the harsh conditions. But it was also where the military sometimes sent soldiers who needed to be isolated from the regular army while serving out their sentences. Rodriguez prepared a detailed recommendation for Marcus's post-conviction assignment, citing his expertise in communications and his need for an assignment where he couldn't compromise unit readiness or endanger other soldiers. She presented her research to Williams, who passed it up the chain of command with his endorsement. Captain Morrison, still angry about the months of sabotage and the damage to his unit's reputation, enthusiastically supported the recommendation. Marcus was sentenced to 2 years in military prison, followed by reassignment to the Arctic radar station for the remainder of his enlistment. The judge noted that the assignment would allow Marcus to complete his military service, while ensuring he couldn't repeat his sabotage activities. The radar station assignment was supposed to last 18 months. In reality, it lasted every single day until Marcus's enlistment ended. Meanwhile, Rodriguez's unit recovered quickly from the sabotage incidents. With Marcus gone and their actual training problems identified and corrected, they began performing at the level their individual skills and experience suggested they should. Captain Morrison, impressed by Rodriguez's initiative and investigative skills, recommended her for accelerated promotion and advanced training. 6 months later, when the unit deployed to Afghanistan, they were one of the best-prepared units in their brigade. Rodriguez, now a specialist, served as a team leader and performed exceptionally throughout the deployment. Her experience uncovering Marcus's sabotage had taught her valuable lessons about leadership, investigation, and standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Williams, who had been considering retirement, decided to stay in the Army for another tour. He'd been energized by working with soldiers like Rodriguez, who embodied the best values of military service. As for Marcus, his letters home from the Arctic radar station painted a picture of a very different military experience than the comfortable rear echelon assignment he'd been trying to engineer. The isolation, harsh weather, and demanding work schedule left little time for scheming or self-pity. The other soldiers at the station, all volunteers who had chosen the assignment for the extra pay and adventure, had little patience for someone who'd been sent there as punishment. Marcus spent his days monitoring radar screens in a windowless bunker, his nights in a small room he shared with another soldier, and his free time, what little there was, dealing with equipment maintenance and survival training. The internet connection was sporadic, The food was basic, and the recreational facilities consisted of a small gym and a collection of books and DVDs that had been accumulating at the station for years. It was exactly the kind of assignment that made soldiers appreciate the relative comfort of forward operating bases in combat zones. Rodriguez kept track of Marcus's situation through official channels and occasional updates from military friends. She felt no guilt about her role in his assignment to the Arctic station. Marcus had made a deliberate choice to sabotage his unit and endanger his fellow soldiers for personal gain. The consequences he faced were the direct result of his own actions. More importantly, Rodriguez had learned that sometimes justice requires individual soldiers to take initiative and hold their leaders accountable. The military's formal systems of oversight and investigation are important, but they don't always catch every problem. Sometimes it takes a young soldier with sharp eyes and the courage to act on her observations to prevent serious harm. Years later, after Rodriguez had completed her enlistment and used her GI Bill benefits to earn a degree in criminal justice, she would reflect on the Marcus Winters incident as a defining moment in her understanding of leadership and responsibility. She'd learned that rank and experience don't automatically confer wisdom or integrity, and that sometimes the youngest person in the room is the one who sees the situation most clearly. She'd also learned that poetic justice isn't just a literary concept. Sometimes it's the natural result of careful investigation, strategic thinking, and making sure that consequences match actions. Marcus Winters had tried to engineer a comfortable assignment by sabotaging his unit and endangering his soldiers. Instead, he got exactly what he deserved: the harshest, coldest, most miserable assignment the military had to offer. Rodriguez had made sure of that, and she'd never regretted it for a single day.